Hello and welcome. You're viewing the Citizens Journalist podcast, Mesa County Compass, that brings you the news that you can use from a different point of view. I'm Ruth.
I'm Lisa.
And together we are Mesa County Compass. Our goal is to create an informed, current, active citizenry armed with the facts. We will be covering what's new to you, what it means to you, what you can do about it, and provide you access to the decision makers when we can.
Hey, good morning. This is Cody Kennedy. I'm hosting Coffee with Cody this morning, and the Mesa County Compass has decided to join me. So welcome, and thanks for coming to talk with me this morning. And happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Yes.
Hi, my name is Dora. I'm a local resident just attending my first Coffee with Cody.
What's your question? And I'm Diane Schwenke, also here to have coffee with Cody and talk about issues that are important to the residents of this community.
Okay, great. And so if you, I got one. So just to catch you up on what we talked about before the camera got on, we were talking about affordable, attainable housing in Grand Junction. In particular, my conversation and discussion was about the time that it takes to get a project through planning. And we recently had a meeting with the Grand Junction, Western Colorado Home Builders Association. Scott Biofis and I both attended that meeting, and we talked about the time, or we actually received input from local builders, and the time it takes to take a project from inception through its actual delivery to actually being able to get a shovel in the ground to increase our supply. So that, I feel, is one of the problems that we've had in that area, in that front. But as we started talking about that, Dora brought up a great point in that a lot of the housing that's been brought on more recently, especially as we look at the apartment complexes, the junction, the planned terminal, we're seeing a lot of market rate come on in supply, which doesn't exactly check the affordable box. You know, when you're paying, $1,900 or $1,000 per head per bed for an apartment. Yeah. So I mean, well, 2-bedroom apartment, if it's $2,000, I mean, that's kind of that market rate, and that's a lot. That's an awful lot. So you're right, and some of them are even more than that, and that's tough. So we, as a city, are looking for opportunities to help projects that hit those lower marks, those like 60% AMI, because in order for us to qualify or meet our requirements for the Proposition 123 grant funds that we're trying to get, we do have to check some boxes in that affordable area, and that's tough to do in projects that are just coming on the market without some additional help from the city. So, and when I talk about additional help from the city, I'm talking about, what can we do with impact fees? How can we help with water taps? How can we help with sewer taps? Those types of things really help. And additionally, one of the things that I've recently talked about and hoped for is that we would also come alongside of them through the planning process every step of the way and say, how do we get you from inception to completion as quickly as possible? So I don't know if that answers what you're getting at, but
Yeah. Is there any requirement that a certain percentage of units be affordable or be set aside for a percentage of people that are at a threshold of AMI?
Yes. So if for certain projects to meet requirements for the Prop 123, and when I say Prop 123, just to be clear, it's Proposition 123, state funds that we would have the opportunity to get to help us with these projects, but we have to meet certain thresholds. And when we say AMI, we're talking about the average median income. So if we throw something out like 60 or 80%, we're talking about 60 to 80% of our average median income, which, we're talking about, I think, around $70,000 is average median income right now. So, take that 80% or 60%, and some projects even lower. But that's the whole thing, is like, how do you meet those thresholds? And and what it ends up being is subsidized. Those projects end up getting subsidized by the city, and also by the state, and that's where we get the tie-in with Prop 123. So we're trying to leverage those dollars.
So I spend a lot of time with builders, and there's two pots. There's the affordable for the low income, where there's definitely a role for government and government assistance in some form. There's also the market forces, and what you're seeing now with the market forces are because at the end of the day, you can't do it all on the back of government. You have to have the private sector. And the private sector has to make a profit. And so when you have things like a broad requirement for affordable units for projects, that's called inclusionary zoning. There has been research that has looked at that, and it actually creates less affordable housing because the builders, again, the entire project has to cash flow, has to make a profit. So what you will see them doing is they will actually move to other locations that don't have that. And in the valley where we are, where you've got the county and Fruita, if you try something like inclusionary zoning, builders will take their projects other places. So there's this balance that has to happen. And the other thing that I think is important in this, I was in the same meeting as Cody was, is that when you look at these projects, the builders that I'm talking to are right now being able to build some products, some homes for under $400,000. They, if you look at the Grand Junction Housing Authority, which is being subsidized, their units are going to cost more like $450,000. So when you bring government into play, it also sometimes can just drive up the cost of projects, just because of what's involved in terms of meeting the criteria for the funding and all the rest of it. So there is a balance. There is a role for government, but there's also a role for the private sector. And when you're down, 3,000 units or something like that in the
3 to
community?
5.
There's not enough government funding to provide the subsidies to have all the affordable housing that we need. And I'm thinking also in workforce housing, because that's a big area for us. So you got to have the partnership and you got to have the balance.
So Diane, I don't need to. Yes, you do. I'm going to ask this of you, since you're with the home builders, and Cody as well. What regulations could be reduced or removed that would help the cost of building a house, and by how much would that help? What doesn't need to be there, and how fast could we do it?
There's no easy answer to that. There's
Actually,
really,
I have one for you, and it's
Okay.
something that the city is going to be considering very soon, is they're going to be looking at upwards of a 400% increase in impact fees.
well, that's for, like, I think we're talking about like
And
what
even,
where we're currently at.
even where we are with the existing requirements, the passage of the TEDS, the Transportation Engineering Design Standards, that for residential neighborhoods said that you had to put 6-foot sidewalks on both sides of the street, have the requirements for the multimodal in some of these areas, maybe on one side of the street, but that in particular is a place where things went overboard. So it drove up the cost of each house. It also has an impact on the environment because you are making more concrete, which
is
creates
part of
greenhouse gases. So that's just one example off the top of my head. And the other piece of it that we're seeing has to do with the process itself, which Cody was alluding to. So, but anyway, TEDS would be a place to go back in and take a look at what was truly needed to meet the needs of everyone, pedestrian, bicyclist, and cars, but not go overboard.
Yeah, and I have one thing. I think as we talk about getting more affordable housing online, I'm a big believer in increasing supply, right? So even, I hope that overall we can drive down the market rate, right? And keep in mind, this is literally my business. Like, I've been in the business of providing rental housing in the Grand Valley for 20 years. All the years that I was a police officer and my wife was a school teacher, we were working to buy these little rental houses along the way, and we still do that. And that to me, I have this front row seat of those market demands and the cost of houses and where they're at, like for an individual single family home, and the rents and how they're driven. And so I'll come back to that kind of market component in a second, because I want to address your question about what the city can do to kind of affect that. One of the issues is, and this I think Emily Powell with Housing Resources of Western Colorado and Laurel Cole with Habitat, both are in that space of those nonprofits that are trying to bring affordable units to families, and a lot of times those involve government dollars that help. But even in the best case scenario, when our planning department, I think, should have more staffing, I think we should have a streamlined process, and the staffing in particular that I'm talking about is basically somebody in the planning department that works as a concierge. So if there's a project that's coming in, especially if it adds substantial amount of kind of that affordable, attainable part of our market in our median price range, that is what we should be helping bring on the market. And that is how we should be working hard to streamline that process to make it as easy as possible for them to get the project done. Because when a project takes, more than a year from its inception to when they start building, the markets have changed, right? Interest rates have changed. Like all these factors that were taken into consideration by these developers and business owners have changed. Could it potentially get better? Yeah, generally it doesn't. Costs generally go up, and that makes things less affordable, and it makes it's kind of a moving target. So why would those builders take that chance? Why would they? When they could just leave their money in the bank, make 4 or 5%, and not take the risk. So, and from what I understand and talking to some of the builders right now, they're just trying to keep their subs busy and trying to keep their employees going because they're not making any money in this market. It's just a matter of saying they want to keep their companies going forward. So they do have to make money. I mean, people kind of think, oh, they're these evil builders. We're going to add all these fees on. What we need to keep in mind as a local government is anytime we add fees, those are passed through to the consumer. Like there's no chance that you're going to be hitting that evil, builder in the pocketbook, because they're just not going to build. As I say often, Atlas will shrug, right? At some point, they're not going to do it. So they'll just not build, which will continue to drive up the cost of housing. It'll drive up rents. It drives up the value of housing. It moves us towards what Boulder has done, what Aspen has done. And it's like, for me, the key is to say, what can we do that really helps keep the people that work in our community able to live in our community, to where our wages, granted, are we're going to see upward pressure on our wages, but we need that. But we
keep our small town flavor.
We do, and that's hard to do. It's hard to do. So, and that's a whole other topic we could talk about as far as economic growth and prosperity, while still maintaining the identity of Western Colorado. So, whole other thing.
So, what new developments do have affordable percentage set-asides that have come to market in the last 2 years?
That's a great question. There's a few. And
if you need to go back and research and get back to me, that's okay.
I would. I know that there's currently a project that we're working on Orchard Mesa called Aspire that we're working on building right now. But as far as like what we've brought on market that are subsidized.
So there is one. There is a private.
Is it? Sorry.
Charlie Getcher's project.
Oh yeah, the BOA Builders, right? Yeah, right. Yeah. So I was at that groundbreaking. I should know. So thank you. BOA Builders, BOA Builders, is building some townhomes right next to the city market on Orchard Mesa, and there is a percentage of those that are affordable and subsidized, and we're very thankful for a builder like BOA Builders to come alongside the city to do that. I don't remember the percentage. Do you remember the breakdown on those?
It is. It's 20% of the units.
Yeah.
And it's a partnership with Western Colorado Housing Resources of Western Colorado as well. So those are going to be actually, and this is one of the things that I have a passion for, is I believe in home ownership.
Right.
I think that's what builds the communities. And these will be owned, but they will be deed restricted for a certain period of time. And Housing Resources is going to provide actual down payment assistance so that people can actually get into those units and be able to afford a home.
And that down payment assistance, there were funds provided by the City of Grand Junction to Housing Resources for that program. So there's all kinds of good things that happen with that. The city also helped with some contributions to the project in the way of waiving some fees and some other things. I don't have the dollar figure off the top of my head, but so that's one. And I granted.
Okay, so I see apartments going up with big city amenities. Any of those projects, do any of those
So
have any sort of set-asides?
If you're talking about like the Junction down at the old
Any
city,
of them?
right? Yeah.
The rail yard,
Yeah.
the ones
No,
on 24,
no.
25, the ones on Grand,
No.
any of those. The ones with hundreds of units, the ones with all of these amenities,
Yeah.
the ones that are going for $2,000 or $3,000 per unit with dozens and dozens of units.
Yeah. No, I don't see that.
Yeah.
And really, I will say that we need supply. So we need I think market rate apartments will drive down if we had enough at some point. We get that saturation point where it drives down. But we can't require, that builder to come in and say, well, you have to do this, right? Now, can we say we're not going to subsidize you if you're not at market rate? Sure. And I will admit we've had a lot of conversation around the fees that the city waived for the Junction, which is at 200 Rood, the old city market location, because those are all market rate apartments, right? And so there's been a lot of pushback. I would have supported it. It happened before I was on council. But I like that we are increasing our supply of housing units. But again, for the folks that are just struggling to even stay housed, those are the people that we need. Like, that's that hard area to address that I think we're working to address.
Well, for example, I'm a landlord, local landlord, and I had my tenants call me at market rate, and they were like, we can't find a house that will, take our dog, and at market rate.
Yeah. That's 100%. I get calls, literally, not daily, but I'll get a call or a text message fairly consistently. Hey, do you have anything available? I have some friends that they have a dog, they're looking for a house, and all of our properties take pets. So I kind of believe that pets are part of the family. That's my philosophy. But it is super, the housing market is super tight. As landlords, we look at that and we say, how do we, when somebody renews, I'm sure you're the same, when somebody renews, you give a very small bump, if any. When they vacate the property, you assess the market and come in closer to a market rate or slightly below, so you keep your vacancy rates low. But yeah, that's the rental market is super tight. I had a long conversation yesterday with John Marshall, CMU, and Derek Wagner, and we talked specifically about the impact of the student housing has on the local rental market. When they have 130%, freshman class size, and will quite conceivably
to provide housing.
No, and they're not, and they're working hard in that direction, right? Exactly. They are working hard in that direction to try to increase number of units, and they're going to be going vertical with some pretty large projects. But I think they're in the neighborhood of 3,000 units. But they've been increasing, literally taking study areas in the dorms, study areas, or even closets, right? Or doubling up some folks to try and create more housing. And I'm all about that. I'd love to see the university get more housing, because I house some students, right? I have some college rentals.
It feels disingenuous to take their tuition and not help them find housing.
Yeah. I would say that they are helping them find housing. I mean, one of the projects you mentioned, the lofts on Grand, is units are rented by the university to put them into that housing, to put freshmen into that housing. So they are helping. They are doing it. But it's impacting our overall supply when they come outside of a student housing realm. So that is, I mean, that's certainly something to talk about.
So I was just going to say, the Grand Junction Area Chamber of Commerce yesterday released the results of their workforce housing study. And it's not just the students, and it's your potential renters, are those who are looking for housing. And the thing that really, I think the tie between our economic prosperity and our access to housing isn't emphasized enough. And in that workforce study, and I don't have the exact numbers because I just looked at it last night, but 68% or something like that of the people who don't already own homes that are working in the community and took part in this survey are looking to potentially leave the community because of that. And so, again, it's a cycle. If businesses can't get their workers here, workers can't find housing they can afford, then we're in a world of hurt.
Yeah.
And so it's all connected, and it's something that we all need to be working on.
Right. Well, sorry, go ahead.
Comment too. A friend of mine who owns Eisman Construction said another problem that this, and it's a city regulation, is that it's very difficult for them to do like the mother-in-law units or the garage, the apartment over the garage, and that people that would like the added income and provide more housing are prohibited from it because of the cost and regulations involved in trying to do that. And they say, hey, there's $50,000 just in fees and stuff for you to do this, and they're going, never mind, I can't afford to do that. And it is regulations that are stopping it.
Right. 100%.
So what can we do?
So that was, before I got on council, that was something I ran into. So on one property, we looked at it has a duplex on it, and there's plenty of space to add a second duplex in an area that needs, I mean, we need housing all over Grand Junction. This happens to be close to Mine Springs, down off of 28 and a half. And so when we started looking at adding that second duplex, we were looking at $100,000 and over before we even started construction on the duplex, and all the impact fees, adding an asphalt driveway. They no longer allow it to be a gravel driveway. Had to have a turnaround that accommodated a fire engine, right? You have to have a water retaining pond. Like, it's like, literally, if you don't want us to build, could you just have saved me some time and just say, we don't want you to build? Mm-hmm. Same thing when I went and I have a house, a really big brick 1960s house that's ideally set up for it to be a duplex, right? And I was going to take this house. It has an entrance in the back that goes straight to the basement, that has 4 bedrooms in the basement, big common area that had plenty of room to accommodate a kitchen, and it would have been an ideal second unit. The upstairs is 3 bedrooms, beautiful house, wood floors, and it would have, and nice kitchen and living area, would have been just a perfect up and down duplex, just to get the paperwork done on it. And this was before I was elected, so we're talking a couple years ago. It was over $10,000. And literally, I had the city manager and the city attorney say, no, it's not that much. Because I'd said that at a couple of public meetings. And I went back to planning, got a printout, right, and said, here it is. This is from our planning department. So I was literally not adding a toilet. I was literally not adding another parking space, right? But the city wanted back then, and I'm sure it's quite a bit more now. I'd say it's probably a third more by now. You want another $10,000 just so I can add another unit it's gonna make me another $300, $400 maybe a month, probably $200 at that time, because you get less rent on the upper unit, you get some new rent on the lower unit, but when you net those out, it's not that much different. But it's a net gain for the city, and it gains another housing unit, especially if it's college housing or workforce housing. Why would I do that? If it's going to cost me $10,000, $12,000 plus building the kitchen in the lower level.
So you could break even in year 5
it's like,
maybe?
Why wouldn't I just leave the money in the bank and get some interest on it? Or,
and if you have damage, you break even in year 8,
yes,
10.
exactly that, and it's regulation, and that's the thing.
Sheer goodwill of your heart.
Yeah, exactly, and that, to me, that's the conversation I keep having, and I feel like when I'm having these conversations around with city council, with city administrators, it's like the math, they don't own a pencil. I don't know what the problem is. It's like, come
buy you a
on.
pencil.
Right. It's like, here, have one of mine. And it's like, it's got, the math has to work. Otherwise people aren't doing it out of, out of goodwill or to make my life more complicated. It's a lot of work to do that, as you know. So anyway, sorry, a little tangent there. So, yeah.
I was just going to kind of piggyback on that. I have the same kind of situation, only mine's all ranch style. It's divided equally in half. If I could add a bathroom, I would have a 2-unit living space, which would give me an additional income because I am retired.
Yeah.
It would be nice to have that additional income, but the fees are just phenomenal. So there's no way that I could afford to do it and come out.
Yeah.
So I understand the dilemma.
Well, and I have to say, this one thing I hear all the time, and I really hadn't heard this before I got on council, but man, staff and other council members consistently say, development has to pay its own way, building has to pay its own way, like over and over and over. And I'm thinking, okay, well, what about those houses that were built prior to all these fees and all these impact fees and stuff being in place? Did we not, like, what about them? Do we go back and assess them, like on their usage for fire or police or parks? Like, what about them? And while I think some impact fees can be justified, it seems like we're just keep on adding more and more onto the back of that new house, and so we're not getting them built.
Well, I'm going back. So again, what could we cut and say, this is nice, but it's not necessary? This, because to me, it's like fourth and fifth, safety, safety, safety. At some point, people are responsible for their own safety,
Right.
and you're trying to virtue signal and say, we're keeping you safe. Well, you know what? That's not the government's role.
Yeah.
Our role is to pay attention. And
We could do a whole show on fourth and
well,
fifth. We probably shouldn't even
I
start
know,
on-
but I'm just saying on a lot of these things, just say what can we cut?
Yeah.
We can make cuts,
Yeah.
and if they're not state mandated, go back and assess them. Say how much does this add to the cost?
Yeah.
Is it necessary? I mean, will eternity not happen if we
Right.
don't have this change?
Yeah.
And go back. And I think Cody Davis had mentioned this, that he said, what we need to build are things that are, you get a choice. Here's the really fancy, we've got the EV, we've got everything for you. Or you can have a more basic thing and it'll be structurally sound, but it doesn't have to be earthquake proof. And I know they don't do that, but all of those extra things that they're demanding. What can we do as a city council? How could we evaluate that and take them off and make it more affordable?
So if we were to go back, for instance, let's just say the council had the will to go back and take a critical eye on the sustainability and adaptation plan that was recently passed, and say, how is that affecting, how could it possibly negatively affect the cost of housing? If we would go back and look at the mobility plan, at the multimodal bike and ped plan, if we would go back and look at TEDS and take each one of those documents and say, let's look at this standalone. Where are we adding costs? Where are we being prohibitive to our affordable housing? And how can we balance safety and that forward-looking, making sure that we're adequately providing for our infrastructure, but say let's look to reduce costs rather than just simply growing expenses every time we add another layer of regulation. So that, to me, it would be the easy button to say, let's go back for the last 2 years and look for places that we could reduce that.
So there's a statistic out there, and this doesn't all apply to the city of Grand Junction, but the National Association of Home Builders has put out an index, and the regulations that are required in new home construction now have hit upwards to 28% of the cost of new construction. So if we're talking about on a $400,000 home, we're already at $120,000. And when it comes to some of the regulations, I think Cody's idea of going back and taking a look, I remember that I testified on the bicycle and pedestrian plan, the mobility plan. I testified on the transportation and engineering design standards, and I kept saying, this is going to drive up the cost of housing, which is a priority for this community and for this council, and yet the costs associated with the regulations were never considered when these plans and regulations and fees were assessed. And I think there is room to go back and cut some of those. And at the end of the day, going back to Cody's example, or even the inclusionary zoning that we were talking about, or the proposed affordable housing fee that the city is looking at the end of the day, if this is a community issue, we need to be looking at a community-wide solution and not putting it on the backs of the housing supply and building the housing supply, because we're just aggravating our own problem by doing that.
Yeah, it is a. These are considerations that are important. As we talk about affordable housing, everybody seems to be talking about that. But what are we doing to actually show that it's a priority? Because, as Dora said, like, we talk about affordable housing, and that's actually what I'm going to be talking to this gentleman about soon. It's like, what's the net takeaway? When we add regulation, like, we do need to make sure that we're forward looking for not just the next few years, but decades in the future. And what are we growing as a community, and making sure that our infrastructure can provide the needs of the community. But I believe we're really standing in our own way. As far as regulations go and creating additional expenses.
So, again, one of my builders, I think, put it most succinctly in a meeting that I was in. He goes, he said, we are in the process of building a, quality community, a quality of life in our community at the expense of those who cannot now afford that, because quality of life starts with your housing situation.
I'm Brandon. I'm with the Business Times, and so I was just going to interview Cody about affordable housing. It's just funny, like, that you guys are already doing this. So
Now you get a little take. What is your take on that?
Well, I'm the journalist, so I'm not giving my personal take on it. I'm just asking questions, and but obviously it concerns everybody. So we need to find out, like, what can we do different, or what are the challenges we're facing, and get all the information out so everybody can know, what's happening, why,
and what we can do about it.
Yeah, and what can be done about it. I feel like if we don't get the information out, then people aren't going to understand, and then they don't know where to point the finger. So that's kind of what I'm all about.
And I'm super glad that we had this opportunity to talk today. If you want to, so Brandon had contacted me maybe just yesterday. We were talking about, like, hey, can we get together to talk about affordable housing? So it's interesting and appropriate that we ended up just talking about that this morning. But it's something that we should be talking about. It's something that we need to work together on as a community. I certainly don't pretend to have all the answers. I have opinions, and I have information that I gather from talking to experts, including Diane, her group, HBA, other people involved in the real estate business, that I think really have some expertise that we should be ready, willing, and able to listen to and incorporate that into our process as we look at regulation, or even better, deregulation in Grand Junction.
So, and I would just add that, going kind of to Brandon's point, I think a lot of these conversations have been happening kind of in silos. A lot of it, frankly, within the community development and housing department over at the city, to the exclusion of some other groups. In my group that I represent, builders talking among themselves, but not with other folks. And I think, honestly, the way we move this needle is that we have a much broader community conversation. I mean, we need to involve the lending community in all of this. We need to involve the business community at large. They can't find employees. There just needs to be a broader, more collaborative effort if we're really going to be serious about tackling this issue as a community.
I will say that I've been very fortunate to be part of those groups that you're talking about. So as we talk about, for instance, what's the need of that affordable housing and our business community. I happen to sit on the Grand Junction Economic Partnership board, and sitting in that room at that table is always humbling, because it is a room full of business leaders that are doing great things, both in the economic stimulus for our local economy, providing jobs, and also for what they actually do themselves. Additionally, having conversations pretty consistently with builders, HBA, and nonprofits that are working in that group. Habitat and Housing Resources. Those are, and heck, there's a new nonprofit that I'm working with called A Special Place Colorado, which provides housing for people with serious mental health diagnosis that are facing homelessness. So that to me is those are the conversations. I don't necessarily want to be the linchpin for all that information. I think that we can both as City of Grand Junction, Mesa County, we can be continuing that conversation and welcoming them, because so often when if Diane comes to represent HBA, comes to a council meeting, if she comes to a workshop, she doesn't get to speak, right? So, because that's not what those workshops are for. It's not for public input. Or if she comes to a council meeting, she gets 3 minutes, and that's not a two-way conversation. She can't ask us council a question, and get an answer from us. It's just she can, talk for 3 minutes and then be done. And then do we listen to it? Do we not? Versus actually having a dialogue, which I think is so important.
So, and to that point, I think this will be kind of a shameless plug, but again, that whole conversation about having a broader conversation. We have an economic summit in this community, and HBA is taking the lead, but we're going to have co-hosts in the Grand Junction Area Chamber, Grand Junction Realtors, Grand Junction Economic Partnership, and the Western Colorado Contractors to actually do a housing summit.
Yeah.
And so there will be a housing summit that will be open to everyone on February 6th. So again, shameless plug. This has just come together, but I think that's a place where we can start to have, we can't put it all on Cody's shoulders.
Right.
That was my other question. Sorry.
How many of the other council people are involved in reaching out and seeing what the other community members think and having those conversations?
I can't speak for other council members. I don't know their agendas or what they're doing. I will say that from the meetings I was at, and last night I was at a 2-hour-long business meeting, city meeting that was held for local businesses that are being impacted by the resource center. Listening, and the city had organized this. I think they invited 10, but 30 showed up. Scott Byoffice was there, and Scott and I disagree on several things, but he listens, and I've seen that. So I was actually put to task recently by basically omitting names of saying, when I say Scott Byoffice is listening, and not saying everybody else on council is listening. I'm speaking to what I know and what I see. And I have to give him full credit for that. And while I say we have some different opinions about some things, I will give him credit for that, for listening. And I think that me coming, I try to come with humility and not try to pretend I know all the answers, because I don't. I mean, I gather a lot of information. I've been working in this space in particular, like landlords. I mean, you know a lot about what's going on with the real estate market for 20 years. Right? Actually over 20 years. I bought what became my first rental house in the late 90s, 98. Before 2000, it was a rental house. So, we've been doing this for a long time. And right. Although that house wasn't in the Grand Valley. I've been doing rental property in the Grand Valley for 20 years. So it's really we all have different perspectives, and I think it's important for people to be heard. I think our nonprofit community is doing some really important work and very aware, right? And there's this whole subset to this conversation as far as the people that are really struggling, that are just on the edge of homelessness, that this affordable piece is incredibly important for. And there's nonprofits that are doing excellent work in that space. Joseph Center is one of them. Mona Highline does incredible work in keeping people housed that we don't even know about. You know, like the amount of money that she is amazing. The amount of money that she puts out just to, one, either get people into housing, helping them with a deposit or a month's rent here or there, or even a utility payment. That keeps people in housing that would otherwise be living in their cars or living in a shelter.
Otherwise, it's a snowball. You just
Yes.
fall off the edge and you can't get back.
So when I look for opportunities for the city to do good work and help, I would rather see the city support a nonprofit like the Joseph Center rather than have the city be in the business of doing that.
Absolutely.
Because there's people that are experts in that area, like Mona and her team, that they see the need and do the deed.
It's 1,000 little slivers of pain.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And that kind of expertise isn't something that the city should just assume they have. I really don't. As we're struggling with the resource center and what those needs are, I'm really hopeful that we don't end up trying to fill a role of providing a shelter, a city-owned, run shelter. I think that would be a dreadful mistake. I'm glad that we have nonprofits like Homeward Bound that are in that space, running their North Avenue shelter, running pathways. While we need that, and we certainly need what Catholic Outreach is doing as well, it's a matter of saying, well, what should the city be doing? What is our role? And really, I think our primary role is public safety, roads, that type of thing. And we tend to spread over time, and that spread gets really expensive for our community as our budget, which in general years when we're not doing big capital projects, is $250 million. This last year it was a lot more because we're doing work on the wastewater treatment plant Persego. This year we're doing additional work on that. Plus we have money, bond money that's come in for the community rec center and projects like that. But $250 million. So a council member is going to have $1 billion worth of tax money go through their hand in 4 years. That's significant. That's a huge trust. That's a big fiduciary duty.
Proportionally is our unhoused population for our population size. Is it bigger, worse than other populations around us?
That's an excellent question. So there's some factors that really play into that. So I would say it's big and it's growing.
But compared to other communities,
So here the problem is what's the actual number, right? So we do what we call a PIT study, or it's a point in time study, right? And so when I looked at the numbers and started looking at the statistics, it's like, oh wow, we have like 2,500 people in our community that are unhoused. And it's like, wait a minute, you're telling me that you're literally counting this kid, or actually two kids, because they're not in the school district, that are sharing a bedroom, and that you consider unhoused. Okay. People that might be living in a hotel room, at some point because maybe they're between situations and living with a family member. When I think of unhoused, I think of people that are living in our shelters, right? That are on that by name list as far as waiting for a place to live, maybe through Catholic Outreach, through one of their housing options, which Mother Teresa Place is coming online soon, which would be great. So my feeling is that it's hard for us to have an accurate count when we don't really know what we have, but I will say that it's growing substantially, and there's two reasons that it's growing. I talked to Mona Highline about this some time ago, several months ago, and I also talked to Xavier, who's the director of Mesa County Public Health. And a couple things we're seeing. One is that with the number of migrants coming into the Denver area, they're displacing a lot of the long-term unhoused in that community. So shelters, food pantries, that type of thing get a huge demand. They're kind of overrun with demand. So those folks push out into other communities around the Front Range and the Western Slope. So we see people that we might not think just that you look at somebody and that it might be a result. I mean, obviously people are going to make assumptions based on how somebody looks, on where they might be from, right? For better or worse, for right or wrong. But the people that you're seeing, you're not going to differentiate them from who we recognize as our unhoused, right? They're just people that are coming from Denver that are looking for more support, more resources. Takes me to my next point, and I heard this last night in our meeting with the business community. If you build it, they will come, right? As we provide those resources, like our resource center and Catholic Outreach, you get people that are coming from, Montrose or Glenwood or other areas that are going to be here because we have the resources. So it's tough, if you try to keep up with those, with our demand, the more you support that, the more demand you get. So how do you ever catch up? So to say that what our proportion is, I think it's such a number that fluctuates. I think it's high based on the size of our population, but I think that it's growing because of the resources we provide. I'm not saying that we shouldn't provide resources, but I mean, it perpetuates the issue.
I guess it's a question of who should provide the resources and how those resources should be provided. Is it our responsibility to take on people from other places, or is, like when we interviewed Deb Lankford before she passed, she said, we need them to come here because we get them on a path. Same thing that Mona does.
Yeah.
Is when they come to her, we don't just say, give you the money for your housing this month, but let's look at why this is happening.
Right.
Let's work with
Well,
you.
those are two very separate things. You talked about two separate things there. Both of them worth talking about, but let's separate those. One is you're talking about the what's government's proper role,
Right.
and should the government be providing money to these nonprofits or to unhoused people directly because of an entitlement, because we should do that as a city? That's the first question. Separately, what is let me see, what was the second one? What are we doing? Sorry, what are we doing to bring? Are we just going to provide that let's say welfare, right? To kind of keep somebody perpetually in one space, or are we bringing them to that next place and trying to lift them up? Let me take the second one first. So this conversation came up during our last workshop for the city because we're talking about how we're going to spend our nonprofit dollars and money that we're designated for that, and then we talked about it going towards helping unhoused, and it needs to be related to housing for us to do that. And I said, well, my feeling is that we need to be specifically looking to spend those dollars on programs that bring somebody from one point up to another point, right? That we need to not get in the business of just maintenance, but of actually trying to lift somebody from where they are, and whether that's mental health and addiction, or just that they're struggling with housing and poverty, and how do we stabilize that and lift them to that next level so they are self-sufficient. So that's one issue that speaks to the first issue about government's proper role. And I get a lot of people think that we shouldn't be in the space at all. And I tend to lean that way, and I don't think it's the city's job to reallocate tax dollars or tithe. We need to take 10% of our gross, budget and put that towards nonprofit. That is not my feeling at all. I think we need to look for needs that our community has, that our community can't meet without the city coming in alongside of them. And it is for Grand Junction's betterment to not have the blight, to not have people that are just living in squalor, and to help people get stabilized to where they can be long-term productive members of our community and have that affordable, attainable workforce housing so that they can afford to live. And when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about a third of somebody's income. The state of Colorado just forced it down landlords' throats to where we now have to accept an application for a property based on somebody, that it's no longer a third, maybe it's half of their monthly income, right? It's 50%. So that greatly increases the odds of that person failing as a tenant, which is horrible for that person because they're going to have an eviction on their record and makes it very, very hard for them to get another place. And it's hard for us as business owners when we have somebody, it's very, very expensive and punitive on a landlord when we have somebody that is in a property that we're going through an eviction process on. They have no place to go. We want to be compassionate, but it costs us several months' rent to get them out. So, anyway, I can go on and on. I do owe Brandon an interview at 10, so we're a little bit past that. I am not saying we have to end. I just want to respect Brandon's time. So, okay. So anyway, I hope I answered your question. I know that was a little bit of a long answer.
It was
So.
exactly what I'm thinking. If mine is the extra people that are coming in to use our resources that are not here, what do you do with that?
Yeah, it's tough because that was a question that was asked last night quite a bit by our business owners to say, we were promised that this wasn't just going to be, this beacon for everybody to come in and all these outside people to come in and utilize this resource center. We were promised that, and that isn't the way it's working out. We had the owners of a car lot down there near the resource center that were saying that he talks to people that are trespassing on his lot quite often. He just talks to them, asks them about where they're from, and he gave us quite a bit of input on that, and it is people from outside of our community in addition to our longtime unhoused community. So my feeling is I really want to support the people that have been here a long time. How do you differentiate that? We're not going to ask people to prove how long they've been here before we hand them a cup of coffee on their way in the door through the resource center. So it's like, how do you balance that? It's and I blogged about this several times. Just giving a shameless plug, Cody for GJ. I've blogged about this, about that, balancing compassion with accountability, and I think that's what makes sense to me, is that you don't just give somebody a blank check. You don't just throw open the city coffers and say, hey, sorry things are hard for you. We're just going to make it super easy without any checks and balances. So we could probably have a whole other conversation about that, and I could talk for an hour about the resource.
Can I raise a controversial point?
Sure.
Okay, here's my point of controversy. So I'm personally not very religious.
Okay.
However, people who claim to be Christian, there's part of the faith that says you should feed the hungry and house the, homeless, minister to the poor, wash the feet, etc. And nobody said, where are you from?
Right.
Where did you come from? What do you look like? And there's always the wonderful story of how the new preacher shows up in the shabbiest, dirtiest, and shuffles around outside and gets shunned by the, churchgoers. And then he, shuffles up and starts preaching and teaches everybody a lesson. So people who are like, you don't deserve our services. It just makes me...
So is there a question in there,
Yeah,
or is it just an anti-Christian
It's just
statement?
a commentary about, if we're going to provide services, if we've made a decision as a city council, as a, decision to make funding, etc., then give the person their cup of coffee, or I don't know. It just feels very hypocritical to then try to judge who's coming to if they've made the decision to put their ego or their shame aside and come to you to receive services, then give them their services, because there's got to be something that I don't think it's great to be poor and unhoused,
So I think there was maybe a question in there.
Yeah.
I'll try to hash that out, but I will say, just first of all, on the commentary as from a Christian perspective, to say the poor will always be with us, right? And we are called to be compassionate, and I think that is important, but I don't feel like it's the city's role, right? I recognize that our Constitution says that we have freedom of religion, not freedom from religion, right? So I think there can be a crossover in that, and not to get into the faith aspect, but a lot of the nonprofits working in this space do happen to have a faith-based element, which, as Catholic Outreach likes to say, they're Catholic Outreach with a small c, not a large c, right? So they're going to serve everybody. To your point, to say, where do we distinguish, or when do we say, oh well, you're local and you're not? I'm not saying that we do that. What I'm saying is that the more services we provide, the more services we're going to need to provide. And you want to talk about a snowball? That's a snowball. Like, that's a snowball effect. So when I'm not saying that we don't provide that to them, when that person comes in, whether they're from Montrose or from Afghanistan, right? Which, and actually the example used last night was Afghanistan, and which I was a part of the Grand Valley Resettlement Program. I was the housing coordinator for that program for a couple of years, so literally welcoming people to our community and finding them housing. I believe in supporting them. Is it the city's role necessarily? No. We shouldn't be trying to discern where somebody's from. We provide these resources to these nonprofits, in this case, Homeward Bound, and expect them to take good care of that money that's been entrusted with them. So that, I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but that's kind of my position on that.
So I'm going to probably weigh in a little bit on the controversy side too. But so I am Catholic. And I think it's not a question of taking care of those. We are called to do that. But I think it's where out of my budget that money comes from. I support my church. I support Catholic outreach. I make the donations. I choose to help in that way. When I pay my taxes, I expect local government to give me good roads, police officers, ambulance services, and the things that are in the purview of what I expect local government to do. So I think it's not a question of if, it's a question of where does the money come from? And that I think is a distinction that we need to make.
You've been listening to Mesa County Compass with Cody, Coffee with Cody, and love the other interchanges with our guests. And this is the truth as we see it, the facts as we know them. You decide.